back. Thank you so much for giving me a week off last week. Sometimes I think it's just good to listen to your soul and take a break. And I just got back from a wonderful weekend celebrating my mother. A lot of you know how close I am to her, and it got me thinking about tonight's topic. So I had a lot of resentment towards my mom for a number of years. What I know now to be very selfish, self centered resentments, yet nonetheless, they were resentments. And I remember early on in recovery, when I started this journey, I was sharing with someone all the resentments that I had towards my mother, that she had done this growing up and she'd done that growing up, and she wasn't there for this, or she was absent for this, or she doesn't know I mean, all the things that I could blame all of my problems on centered in my mother. And this individual looked at me and she said, when are you going to stop looking at everything that your mother didn't do for you and start looking at all of the things that she did do for you? And what I started to realize when I started writing those things down was my mom did a lot for me that she didn't have to do. She was doing the best that she could with what she had. And so it started this journey of changing the way I look at things. And we've all heard the saying, change the way you look at things and things will change. You're not in charge of your first thought, but you are in charge of your second. All of you have heard me talk about that. And so we have to train our second thought to tell our first thought, we don't think like that anymore. And yet I've gotten asked this question a lot lately, and it really made me sit down and reflect on how have I done it? So I've had a few people say to me, you know what, Bryn, you talk about first thought, second thought, and I get all that. And you talk about, thinking positively versus negatively. But really when it came down to it, how did you start reversing the way that you think? And so I came up with the 5 ways, the 5 steps, so to speak, that I've used and continue to use to reframe my thoughts. What I call them is negative thinking traps, and we all get on them. You can call it the negative thinking train, you can call it the negative thinking trap, you can call it the negative thinking black hole, because sometimes that's what it turns into. And we all have them. We all have thoughts that will creep in every once in a while that serve us no purpose. And so the first thing is we have to identify the negative thinking traps. And the way that we do this is by journaling or writing down our thoughts. When we're thinking this way, what are we thinking? What are exactly the thoughts that come to mind? And if we do this long enough, what we'll start to see is we'll start to identify patterns. And so by starting to write down my thoughts, I slowly over time started to realize that there were certain patterns. There were certain times when I was under stress that those negative thinking traps would come in more easily. When I was in certain social settings, those negative traps would come in. When I was alone, a lot of that negative thinking would come in. And as I started to document it, I was able to start looking for the patterns. And what this did for me was a few things. The first thing it did for me was it helped me recognize the thoughts that I could easily ignore. There are the ones that are that quick first thought, and I'm easily able to just reverse it, right? When I tell myself that maybe my hair doesn't look exactly the way that I need it to, or I'd like it to, I can quickly say to myself, it's just hair, right? That is something that I can have as a fleeting thinking trap that I already know how to get out of pretty quickly. And then what it helps me do is it helps me identify the negative thinking traps that are going to take me into that black hole. We all know the ones that once we jump on that train of that negative thought, it's off. It has left the station, and all we're doing is sitting in it, and it's taking us into a darker and darker and deeper thinking place. And the next thing you know, we've created these massive stories in our mind over this little tiny negative thinking trap that we could have reversed. So how do we start to reverse it? Once we've identified what they are, then we can ask ourselves, are they factual? Because see, you've heard me talk about feelings are not facts. And so a lot of times what I will do is I will ask myself, is this 100% true? What valid proof do I have that it's true? For instance, it is understandable that my feelings may be heightened around this certain thing at this moment, right? Maybe someone didn't necessarily treat me the way that I thought they should have treated me today. It is understandable that my feelings are going to be heightened at the moment, that I may be offended, or I may feel left out, or I might have a little bit of FOMO. That's understandable. Yet, does it mean that they don't like me? Does it mean that they don't want to work with me? Does it mean that they're upset with me? Is that 100% true? Are these facts or are these fear? Are these based on our feelings, or are they truly because someone said to us, I don't like you, I don't want to work with you, I'm mad at you? And most of the time, if we can ask ourselves those questions, we start to understand and give ourselves grace that it's just our emotions that are heightened around the situations. It's actually not factual. So the first thing is to do your fact check. The next step, which is the third step, is to ask yourself, is this helpful? Is this thought serving any higher purpose for me? Is it helping me? Because sometimes there's truth in the negative thought, but it doesn't mean that it's helpful to keep thinking that way. It doesn't mean that it's going to serve you at a high level. So asking yourself, is it helpful? What can I gain from it? How is it serving me, or how is it serving others? Can be an easy way to start to reverse that thought and get out of the negative thinking trap and reframe it. Number 4 is to ask yourself, what would you say? So if a friend came to you and they were dealing with this certain negative thinking trap, what would you advise them? What would you tell your best friend? Typically, we treat those that we love the most the kindest. So reverse it. Reverse it and take yourself out of the equation. Maybe do a little bit of a bird's eye view looking down. And what would you tell your best friend that's in the same exact situation? This can also help you recognize that your negative thinking, that voice is separate from your rational thoughts. That this is just a voice, this is not factual, this is just a feeling, and it is not a rational thought. By taking yourself out of that situation and advising it another in a capacity of looking at your best friend in that situation, now you're starting to separate it. Now it's not as much reality, and it's not a rational thought. You're able to identify it more as an irrational thought. And then you want to ask yourself, what are some of the different ways to look at a situation? And this is the one that really helps me, and it's so simple. It's the benefit of the doubt, right? Asking yourself, what is the benefit of the doubt? What is another way of looking at this, right? For instance, a girlfriend and I were talking today about how we have come to a place in our society where we have to quickly respond to text, we have to quickly respond to email, or it means something. It means that it's not a priority, or we weren't able to help them. And the reality is that somebody could just be late, or they could just have a higher priority, or their kid could be sick, or they could be running late to pick their kid up at school. There's a million different reasons, but typically when we're in that negative thinking trap, it's because we're only thinking about ourselves. We're only thinking about how that situation affects us. We're not thinking about anyone else in the situation. So start to look at things a little bit differently. This is when I also say phone your friend. If you're not able to give the advice to your best friend, call someone that can call you on your BS. Right? I've talked a lot about surrounding yourself with people that will be honest with you, that you've given permission to them to be honest with you. So I have a few of those friends that when I call and I have these thoughts and I'm like, hey, I'm thinking this way, they know they have full carte blanche to say, you're being crazy, go do this, this, and this to get out of this thought and come back to me when you're out of it, or let me know. And then they're also friends enough and bigger and they're such good friends that they'll call me in a couple hours and say, hey, how are you feeling? Right? Yet we've got to be willing to pause and get ourselves out of the situation. So step 5 is realistic versus positive. Just because it's a negative thought doesn't mean that the only way to offset it is with a positive thought. Sometimes that's not where we want to be. And I'll be honest with you, there are some days that if you tell me to look at sunshines and rainbows, I'm not going to want to. I need to be more in a realistic place of thinking than just a positive way of thinking. Healthy, more productive thoughts, not just positive thoughts. Because you are looking to not only reframe the thought in that moment, you're looking to reframe all of your thoughts long term. So real quick, the 5 steps to recap is number 1, identify your negative thinking traps. So journal your thoughts so that you can start to see what are the ones that stand out the most, are the hardest to control and the hardest to reverse. Number 2 is fact check. Ask yourself, is this 100% true? What evidence do I have to support this negative thinking trap? Number 3, ask yourself, is this helpful? How does this serve me? Is it serving me? Is it helpful? Number 4, ask yourself, what would I tell my best friend? What advice would I give my best friend if he or she came to me with this same negative thinking trap and they were thinking the same exact way? What would I say to them? And then number 5, asking yourself, what is the realistic way to think around this? Not just the positive, but the realistic. So I hope this helps, guys. If you have any other questions around reframing or how to change the way you look at things, just reach out. Otherwise, I'll see you next Monday. Have a great week. Bye.